We're live.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers.
And I'm Olivia Candosia, but this is not, he's a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy.
Yes, I'm running to the restroom. I'll be right back.
Okay. Hi. We work at Effective Artistry. I'm an intern here. We are a private practice based in Northbrook, Illinois. This is not therapy for many reasons. One of the many reasons being we are online and live, and what you say others can see. This is just an open conversation, an open space for us to just chat. So don't feel like you have to be on topic. Please interrupt. We are doing the best of our ability to figure out what you want to hear and talk about. So please interrupt. And I'm going to try and work on that today. I'm going to try and speak more today. Brandon is challenging me, or at least I'm challenging myself to do more so of that, because Brandon's very skilled in chatting just about anything, and I'm going to try and do that today too. At Effective Artistry, we offer individual, couples, family, and group counseling. We've got a few groups that are launching soon. We're going to be posting some videos this week about it. Lots of creative-based groups. A lot of them are all online right now, but more information to come. So stay tuned for that. What else? I don't know what else. So we're going to do our best to just chat. Brandon and I just got done talking a lot about language and the specificity of language, which has been kind of messing with my head, but also been really fun. Yeah, I'm not experienced in streaming on my own, only with him, so it feels very funny right now to just talk on my own, but that's all right. This is what you gotta do, is you gotta practice the skill, and you'll get better at it with time. So here I am modeling that. A little bit about me. I'm an intern. I also have a drama therapy background, so I do drama therapy with some clients, which could involve improvisation, role play, games, things like that. And yeah, if you're curious about that, please feel free to write in the chat. Brandon and I bond a lot through our background in acting together, which is one of the many reasons I was captivated to come to Effective Artistry, because I saw that was his background and that he is a dungeon master. And yeah, that was very exciting for me. What else? I'm not too sure what else to say. I'm hyper aware of the sink that I know he's going to wash his hands in right in the room outside of us. And so I'm just like waiting for him to come rescue me from this moment. I'm also thinking about how one day, I don't know what day that will be, but one day we'll get a better camera, which will help with the visual quality and hopefully make it a little easier to see our beautiful faces. Yeah. Let's see. Oh my gosh, I really don't know what to say. And I was just telling Brandon I don't like to talk, and he said, "No, Olivia, you really do like to talk." And so, like, no, I like to talk, Brandon, when I know what I'm talking about. So let's work on talking when I don't know what I'm talking about. I went to a wedding this weekend and thought a lot about, so many things. Thought about the idea of like putting a wedding on for yourself versus for other people, and the magic of weddings and the beauty of them. And just thinking like what I would do different if I were to get married. I find out I do that a lot, and I'm always analyzing a situation of like, what could I have done better? Or like, why does this not resonate with me? And analyze kind of that kind of thing. And gosh, I for a while thought that is a bad thing, but no, it's just, no, we all have our own perspectives, and that's okay. And it's okay for me not to enjoy things, especially if they don't resonate with me. And there were some things in this wedding I attended that I was like, I that's too by the books for me. I need some more magic. I want some like real goofy stuff. I want a random performance done by a friend who's a performer. I want more color. I want a less drabby room. I don't know. I feel like he's doing this on purpose. I feel like he is leaving me in here longer to force me to speak more. But yeah, I thought a lot about just the wedding in general and the format of it. And then I also was thinking about how it is to meet strangers. And for a while in my past, how I would really want to make sure people like me and know everything about me. But at this wedding, I wasn't as preoccupied with that. I really didn't care. I wasn't worried about like who I was talking to, if I was talking to anybody. I was a lot more self-forgiving, while also still having an awareness of it all, right? And yeah, it was a very interesting experience to kind of not worry about that. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Where are we at?
I did the intro. I was just talking about how I went to a wedding this weekend, and how it was interesting. Lots of things. One, the way I present myself. Two, the way I am always judging an environment in ways of like, what would I do differently?
Meaning like, how would my wedding be different than this one?
Yes, and why I didn't like certain things about it. But yes, how would mine be different? Sure.
Was there any times that you're thinking how yours would be different that wasn't like, there's something about this one I dislike? Is there stuff where it's like, I like this and I would still do it this differently instead? Or like, I have no thoughts about liking or disliking this and I would do it differently?
A lot of it was just dislike.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was very by the books, this one, which surprised me. It was very traditional, very, I don't know, nothing unexpected, and it was just interesting to me.
You want something unexpected to happen at your wedding?
I want something like, it didn't feel magical, Brandon. I want like a fun, customized performance, or like some.
But not literally unexpected. You just mean like different from the.
Yes, I want something novel.
Non-traditional.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But you want to expect everything that's going to happen. Or do you want things to happen at your wedding that you're like, I had no idea this was going to happen?
If it's funny. I don't know. No, I just want more novel things. I want unexpected things when I'm going to events.
Things that you don't expect.
But not like the microphone not working during the vows, which is something that happened at this wedding.
Or someone being disruptive in some way that.
Yeah. I want fun novel.
You just mean non-traditional.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I don't know what elements you're talking about as being traditional. Just generally, I think it can be, well, I didn't ask this and I'm not asking it now, although you can respond to it if you want. But, if I can identify things that I dislike, that doesn't necessarily mean that I came up with what I would like differently or better instead.
Yeah.
I can just say like, well, I don't like that without having come up with like what I would do instead.
Sure. Sometimes I do that. I don't. In this case, I was thinking about other weddings I've gone to that have done things like that and plug those in.
Are you suggesting or do you think that like your experience that you're talking about right now is different from other people's? Like that when people go to events, they don't generally think about like, well, I like this, I don't like that so much, whatever.
No, I suppose people do that constantly. Yeah.
It's just the way you're talking about it seemed like you might be saying like, this is a thing I do, but
it seemed
it's
like
bad or something.
Yeah, it seemed like a thing I'm hyper aware of that I do. I'm always
Yeah, because you think it's bad.
Yes. Yep.
People generally are very aware of when they do things that they think are bad things to do.
Yep.
But like,
oh my God, even after like the ceremony, Brandon, someone said like, wow, like beautiful ceremony. And in my head, I was like, oh, I hope it's not just this conversation all night. But like, of course they said it's a beautiful ceremony. What else are you going to say? And
was it not a beautiful ceremony? I mean, that person obviously thought it was.
It's ceremony.
Well, I guess I'm curious what beautiful means to you, but like when you go to see a play.
Yeah.
As we've mentioned on the stream before, you and I both have like
Yeah, I talked
backgrounds
about
in the
that
theater.
here. Mhm.
When you go to see a play, when anyone goes to see a play, wouldn't you expect that some of what they're thinking is about what they like and what they don't like?
Yeah, I don't know what makes me think I'm different in this way.
And if there's some elements of the play that you like, even though there's some that you don't like, couldn't you then still say like, oh, I really liked this part of it or whatever?
Yeah, that's true.
Like a thing can be traditional and beautiful. Those are not
Yes.
mutually exclusive.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're using beautiful just to mean like optimal or
I'm thinking beautiful. I'm actually, when I hear beautiful, I'm thinking the word sentimental and like touching, oddly.
well, that's not odd in that context, you know.
Yeah.
Like, in that context, like, oh, what a beautiful moment or what a beautiful sentiment or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't think anything about it was touching?
The moment that I did find touching, I brought up.
Okay, so there was something that you found to be touching.
Yes. I was just thinking of it too literally, like, overall, did I think it?
When you think about your wedding that you're going to do someday,
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that this is what you're thinking is like, if someday I get married, this is how I want to do it. Not
Mhm.
necessarily that you're actually like planning a wedding right now. Would you design it around like what you would want it to be?
Yes, but that there lies the problem though, Brandon, because I felt like this wedding was designed for other people and not customized enough for the bride and groom.
You felt like that.
I thought it.
And what made you think that? What is it that happened that you're like, oh, you know what? I don't think that's for the bride and groom. I think that's for other people.
Oh man. Now I'm like, well, I guess it was for them. It just wasn't me. And it just didn't resonate with me.
That's hilarious because what you're saying is like, I thought it was designed for other people, not for them. But because I'm other people and it wasn't what I would have wanted, I just assumed they just did a bad job of designing it for other people instead of like, they probably designed what they wanted.
Right.
Or to whatever extent they designed it for other people, the other people that they had in mind were not me.
Right.
It was their parents and their whatever, you know.
Right.
Because I am sure that to some extent what they designed was like with their parents or
100%. And yeah,
whatever in mind.
no, there were a lot of custom things. I think I just.
So you didn't find it touching. Do you think that they found it touching?
Yeah.
Well, then who's it for?
Not me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wedding. It's not a performance. It's meant to be meaningful.
I watched a lot of like TLC shows where they had like the 5 brides attend each other's weddings and rate the weddings together. It's
Among the things that I dislike, and I don't mean to say that like all elements of what I'm about to describe are unlikable. There's cool stuff too, whatever. But among the elements that I dislike about like the proliferation of reality television is that idea that there's a right way and a wrong way to do anything.
Yeah.
There's a right way and a wrong way to do interior design, as opposed to like, no, you live here. It's about what you want it to be, both in form and in function. Not like, well, the trend right now is blah, blah, blah. Like,
right.
Interior designers, professional interior designers and renovators, like very much are incentivized to talk about trends because by calling something a trend, we're identifying this is popular now and it won't be popular. Something else will be more popular later. So if you're designing this based on the popularity of a thing, then you're going to redo it and redo it and redo it. Not that you won't do that anyway, even if you're doing it based on what you like, your tastes and your life change and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the idea that doing something that's on trend is good and not on trend is bad. Whatever. If you like shag carpeting, you like shag carpeting. And that's what you were thinking, right? It's like, well, when I do my wedding, I'm going to make it be what I want it to be, not what I think other people want.
Which is literally what they were doing, probably.
Well, to some extent. Also, you're not going to do that.
Is your microphone the right microphone?
Oh, that's a good question. Thanks for thinking of that.
Mm-hmm.
What made you think of that? Because the microphone is over there right now.
Yeah, I was looking over there.
It is the correct microphone. It's just not in the spot that we usually have it in.
Here.
It's over there.
You gonna move
And
it?
it is, well, it's still picking up. You say something.
Hi. Hi.
I think it's okay. I actually don't think you're much further from it than you usually are. I'm a little closer and you're a little further, but
Okay.
if any of you watching are able to and willing to put in the chat, would you let us know if the sound's coming through okay, or if it could use adjusting? And if so, we can. I'm just gonna pop this over slowly. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. My wedding was very traditional
Was it?
to like other people's, not traditional to what I was used to. In where I come from, like for the most part, growing up and stuff, when I went to weddings, generally those weddings were people who were younger than like what would be thought of. I think if you told someone like picture the archetypal American wedding, because of that, so influenced by like TV and movies and whatever, I think generally you're thinking about people who have a little more money and people who are like a little older and more established, not a couple 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds or whatever, but like someone who met in college and now they're 25 or 26 getting married, whatever. So where I'm from, not from, but where I mostly grew up and most of the weddings I went to, like not a lot of money was spent on those weddings. A lot of like receptions in the church banquet hall or whatever that's free for people to use, and very different kind of a thing. But I moved out here to Illinois and married somebody who has a different cultural background than me, and hers is much more in line with like what I think the archetypal traditional American wedding is, getting married at the church with the priest, and then the reception at the like, separate location where there's a DJ and open bar and dancing and all that kind of stuff. My wedding was fantastic. I loved it. It was great, and other people loved it too. Very traditional. Yeah.
You want me to traditional?
Well, what was traditional about this one? What do you think of being traditional?
Honestly,
for a
like
wedding?
it was so much money was put into it, and
Yeah, a good amount of money was spent on my wedding, not by me, but
it was wild.
thankfully, I don't mean to complain. That's great.
Yeah. I don't know. You know what?
Is that all you mean? Is it was an expensive wedding?
A little bit, and it like I'm thinking format wise, like there wasn't anything that was like different.
By format, you mean like
You
they
do.
get married, then there's a reception,
Yep, and
like
then
the best man does a toast and the maid of honor does a toast. You don't want that stuff though when you get married? If you get married, whatever.
I don't know.
Do you really just mean it was an expensive wedding?
I think so.
So this is just like pure resentment of like,
Well,
if I was going to spend this much money, I would have done something cool.
I think so. I genuinely do. Well, also because like it was so much money, and yet I still felt like I was seated on an airplane in those seats at like the service.
If you were evaluating the wedding and thought like this wedding cost $500, then what would you think? Oh, okay. So it's like you went and saw a Blockbuster and you're like, well, this is entertaining and all, but on a $500 million budget.
When I know that the venue cost $1,300, just the venue, and I'm sitting so close to somebody, it was very.
I don't want to shatter any illusions or anything, but I'm fairly certain that the like average wedding cost, obviously this is selecting for a certain population, in Illinois is like $70,000.
I hate that so much.
Oh, it's absurd.
I hate that.
Yeah, it's funny because my like weddings that I went to from where I'm from, because I don't want to mention anybody specific, talking about particular people's weddings, but like spending $2,000 on the venue was like a good amount of money to spend, and then out here with the kinds of weddings that like I've mostly gone to out here, it's like, no, that's nothing.
Yeah. I was like, appetizers were so fancy. And then they had Chicago flavored tapas or Chicago themed
Oh,
tapas
but that's so traditional though. That's not unique or
and a
like
photo
novel.
booth.
Well, that is kind of common these days at that kind of way.
Yeah. I don't
But
know.
like Chicago themed tapas, you're like, oh, this is the same as every other
It
way.
didn't come out till the end. I didn't know.
Yeah, we had a hot dog cart come out.
Did you?
At like, I think the reception went until, I don't remember, either midnight or 1, something like that. And the hot dog cart came out at like 11 or something when people had been drinking a lot and
Mhm.
wanted some food. We didn't stay till the very end of our reception. But. So you just wish you could spend a lot of money on your wedding.
I love an idea of a custom, money. What? But also, I don't think that. I think it's into money talk, and I don't.
You don't what?
I feel like I would want to be more. I'm gonna say responsible with my money and use it for a honeymoon or use it for say buying a house. But
Why is using it for a honeymoon more responsible? I can see why it would be preferable. I don't see why it would be more
I guess responsible is not the right word then.
Well, house, I could see the statement of that being more responsible.
Yeah.
Sure. Look, I'm coming at this, I'm trying to be very transparent about my experience and my position of this, which is like, I didn't have any money.
Mhm.
And where I am from and the weddings I'm used to are weddings with people who like don't have a lot of money to be
Mhm.
spending on it, or whatever money they have, they're saving it or doing something else with it instead. So that's always what I just would have assumed. I didn't like think about in advance, what's my wedding going to be like very
Right.
much, but like I would have assumed and totally would have been fine with that kind of wedding. But I'm not opposed to the wedding that I ended up having where,
Right.
My wife's family paid for everything, literally everything, which was wonderful. And it was really cool. And like, again, if I was the one spending the money and it was my decisions, that I likely would have had a much more frugal wedding, yes.
Mhm.
But I also don't resent like people spending their money on something that they want to spend it on, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just going to walk around. How I think of money, how I would spend money, what I value is different than what other people think and what other people do.
Mhm.
And if I just look at what everybody else is doing through the lens of, do I think that's the best way to do it?
Sure.
I'm just going to be like annoyed all the time.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm saying I approve of everyone spending money however they spend it. I'm not saying that. I'm also, why does it matter whether I approve or disapprove? It's just not really worth my resources to think very much. Unless I have some ability to influence how that person is spending their money, then what's the point?
Right.
It's just a waste.
Yep.
I could think of myself as being better than them because I wouldn't spend money that way, but I have plenty of other ways to think of myself as being better than people. I don't need that one. Honestly, we've been talking about this lately a lot. I think we talked about it on the stream last week too. This idea that like it is a very understandable and noble thing for people to want to do the right thing. I'm not arguing that like you shouldn't want to do the right thing, but we have to point out that in actuality, any focus on attempting to do the right thing is actually a focus on attempting to avoid doing the wrong thing. So if you're evaluating things in this way, what's the good or bad way to spend money? Mostly what you're doing, the majority of the time, is identifying things that you think are the bad ways to spend it. I'm not talking about you, but it seems like you're interpreting it as though I am.
No, there's something. No. I'm thinking about something somebody I know is doing, and it's more of an off-camera kind of thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, just generally, if you think like what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do, which again, not saying is the wrong thing to do. Like I understand why people do it. I think there's a lot of nobility in that. It's just that in practicality, what that ends up being is you are searching for things that are wrong so that you know what not to do, because there's no way ever to know what to do. You get ideas of it, but you can't know that it's the right thing to do. But you can know what's the wrong thing. So you just end up, the majority of your experience then is focused on what is bad stuff. What is bad stuff that I'm doing that I shouldn't do? What is bad stuff that other people are doing that I should avoid doing that same thing? And it's not super pleasant and it's not super effective.
Makes me think of this mom who's like an event organizer. Her daughter came home from school and she goes, "Mom," the mom goes, "Oh no, was it poorly organized?" And the daughter goes, "It was poorly organized."
That's funny. I like that. That it has like the structure of a joke too.
Yeah.
You know, that the event organizer, no matter what event they go to, is just like, how is this organized?
And the kid being aware of it now.
Well, we talked about in the past that like when you start training as an actor in like formal ways, right? You start undergoing like professional actor training. Then there's a portion of time there where now every time you watch a show or a movie or a play or whatever, all you're focused on is the performances, the acting of it. And even when it's really good, you're still evaluating it as this is good acting rather than like experiencing it. Just as you become more aware that something is valuable, you develop more language attached to very specific, precise elements of that thing. And as you do that, you become more aware of all of that. And at first, you don't really know what to do with that information because you haven't had it before, so you can't have developed ways to utilize it. So you just start getting it a lot and not knowing what to do with it. And it's like, whoa. But then as you get it, you eventually like start formatting ways, creating frameworks to utilize it, and then you don't notice it as much anymore.
I'm thinking about my like audio visual friends who like anywhere we go, they're just like, look at the wiring up there. Like they have this hyper awareness of how like things are cordoned and things. That awareness doesn't go away. What are you saying? Like you just stop thinking about?
It's that you create frameworks in order to utilize the information.
Okay.
So like when they point that out
Yeah.
to you, that's probably frustrating or annoying to you because it's calling your attention to something that like, I now have this information and it is useless to me. There's nothing
Right, because I don't know what
doing
that
with
means.
that.
Yeah.
Not only in the sense of like I physically can't do anything about it, but even in the sense of like I'm not like that information isn't like being slotted into some process
Right.
that I then come to a conclusion or think or feel a certain thing. It's just okay, great. You know, kind of I've used this example before of like if you were walking down the hall and someone's walking past you and they just say, "Look at your shoes," you'd be like, what's wrong? What's going on?"
Sure.
Right? Not like because when people draw your attention to something and you don't know why or what's the point. So what I'm saying is you develop frameworks so that your awareness of that thing then gets fed into those frameworks and your awareness shifts to being about the output of the framework rather than the input.
Mm-hmm.
At first it's all just the data and you're like, okay, I see this, I see that, but it's not cohesive. I don't know what to do with it. And then later on, like it's not like trained actors don't then say like that was a good performance or a bad performance. They still do, but in the moment of it, you're not as aware of all the specific, they don't have the language popping up in your mind and whatever. Later on, you can go back and assess it and apply all that language. There's a difference between like noise and signal, or maybe as a metaphor, better to say noise and music. That because everybody like watching this stream, and I can make this statement confidently, even though this isn't a universal human thing, it is something that overwhelmingly unlikely that these things I'm about to say wouldn't be true of someone who speaks English well enough to find value in watching this stream. That the pentatonic scale. You don't probably know what that means. And if someone asked you what's the pentatonic scale, you couldn't say it. But if I said like, ba, ba, you would do the correct note next in the pentatonic scale. Ba, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm putting together like pentatonics. That's why they're called that.
By the way, that example, I want to make it clear, is something that, blanking on his name, I'm going to get it in a second. Don't worry, be happy. Bobby McFerrin, who is brilliant, amazing, by the way. Most people only know that song from him. The dude is incredible as a vocalist and as just like a music theoretician. But he travels around and does like panels and presentations and stuff. And he's actually demonstrated that in places where like that are not Western and don't necessarily have like the same traditional roots of music theory as Western. Although I would assume that generally he's speaking to audiences who are interested in like either they speak English or are interested in what English speakers would have to say, and there's a lot of overlap there. But anyway, he'll get up on stage and he just jumps in. He doesn't explain any of it. You can look it up on YouTube. He just jumps in space in place. He's just like ba ba, and he like gestures at the crowd, so they all start doing it with him. Ba ba, and then he goes ba, jumps to the right, ba ba ba, and gets the crowd to do it with him. And then he goes ba ba, and then jumps again to the right, and he doesn't say anything, and everybody in the audience goes ba. He's like, see there, I've done that like all over the world. Dude is awesome. Should look into him.
It's so cute.
But anyway, like, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. Same like people know rules of grammar, or at least they speak in ways that follow rules of grammar without having an intellectual understanding of it. Because these rules, the scale, rules of grammar, these are things that we observe what happens already, and then we label what is happening. We then tend to get confused when we're taught these things and think that the rules tell you how to do it properly. You need to learn the rules so that you do it properly, instead of, no, these are the rules that exist to label what you've already been doing. So there's all kinds of stuff that you don't intellectually know that you know, but you act on it. That's what we're talking about, frameworks, right? Meaning you don't have to identify, oh, that's the node or that's the root node or whatever, to just have an intuitive, like the next node is.
Brennan, you've talked about how someone could learn to have perfect pitch, and you've made
That's more theory than anything, but yeah, keep going.
And you've made the argument of like, no, you're not born with it. Like you actually have to like learn.
I believe this to be true,
Okay.
but I don't have evidence
Okay.
to prove the point. But yes, I believe it to be true.
Tell me why.
Because I think it's about language acquisition,
Mm-hmm.
meaning, all right, a person with, I guess we should explain just in case people don't know,
Mhm.
perfect pitch is a phrase that refers to a person's ability to hear a sound
Ding, ding, ding.
and label in like Western traditional music notation what that is. Like you hear a note and you're like, that's a C sharp or whatever. Typically also refers to a person who you can then do the reverse, where you can say, do a C sharp, and then they'll go, pa, and it's a C sharp. And most people can't do that. The numbers I've always heard is that it's about 1 in 200 people has perfect pitch. Is that about what you heard?
I don't know.
That's what I've heard.
Math.
I would assume, even if that's what I've heard, I'm assuming that that's what's like generally said about it. I would assume that like there's not good evidence for that number to know
Ray has
that
one.
like, you'd only be able to survey people who are aware that this is even a thing and blah blah blah. But it is also talked about as though it is an inborn thing, like you either have perfect pitch or you don't. As is singing, by the way, right? Like everybody just says, I have no ear for pitch or whatever. That you just have a natural ability to sing or you don't, a natural ability to keep rhythm or you don't. And I am sure, that both with singing and keeping rhythm, that can very well be learned.
Yeah, keeping rhythm I'm still having a hard time with.
Sure.
But yes.
But in fact, not only can it be learned, it must be learned, because what we define as a rhythm, what we define as singing, is a specific cultural set of things.
Mm-hmm.
So someone has to learn to do the things. You can say that there's something intrinsic about them that enables them when they learn that stuff to like learn it more quickly. Sure. Or match certain like expectations more closely, more quickly. Whatever.
Yeah. I'm getting jealous of those kids on TikTok that like are composing music on their little keyboards at like 5. I'm like, damn.
Well, so math is similar to this, but not exactly the same. Music, at the end of the day, when we're talking about music, it's language.
Mm-hmm.
It's symbolic representation. It's utilizing symbols, whether that's in music notation, like the visual symbols, or in the actual like experience of music, the sounds that connect to something, right? You you play a minor chord and it feels a little sad. You can play that major seventh chord and it feels a little bright or whatever, right? And it's about combining all this stuff together in ways that communicate something to people. That's what music is. But yeah, in order for someone to be able to say like that's a C, they have to know what C is.
Sure.
So I believe, I haven't experimented with this or looked into, it might be known, this might already be known, and you and I are just referring to some like stuff that people
Sure.
say but isn't established in the research or whatever. But I would assume that like you have to hear a sound and know that it's a C, and if you do that enough, eventually those two things become linked in a way that you would theoretically be able to identify that that sound is a C.
Mhm.
In the same way that like I don't have perfect pitch. You tell me to sing a C and I couldn't do it. I don't know what sound is a C or not. But there are all kinds of songs that, maybe not all kinds, but there's at least a handful of songs that I have sung enough and know well enough that I know like what it feels like in the mouth and whatever, that I could start singing it a cappella without something to give that whoo pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to start it on the right note, or at least fairly close.
That's how
to it.
that resonates.
So instead of thinking of that as like, this is the first note in this song, if I were just to think of it as, this is what a C feels like when I make it,
Mm-hmm.
then I would now be able to make a C whenever somebody says it, right? Of course, it's hard to like, without doing research. The more I say it, the more I'm assuming research has been done, and this has been, because it would be relatively easy to research. Like whether someone could acquire the ability to do this.
Yeah.
Mostly doesn't matter enough to be worth doing, right? Like even if you're a professional musician or singer, you don't need perfect pitch to be successful. Most people don't. So it's not like valuable enough for people to put in the time and effort to try and make it happen if it's not easily coming to them.
I'm going to interrupt because
Yes.
I saw someone post about a podcast. I don't remember the name of the podcast. Maybe it'll ring a bell for you. And it's about children with autism who have these nonverbal children with autism who almost have like telepathy like abilities that they are doing like research on, or like,
What does that mean? What are they doing? That's
I
been
don't
described as
know. I was going to ask you
telepathy?
if you knew about this.
I have not heard of this. But what is it that they do that people are like, that's telepathic?
I don't know. I just saw someone post like, oh man, this podcast is like awesome.
I mean, I'll listen to it, but I have suspicions right off the bat.
Do you?
Well, yes. There's lots of things in that I'll say are red flags, but it's important. I do try to make this clear to people. Red flag is not the same as problem.
Sure.
A red flag is a thing that is there to warn you about there's the potential of a problem. Be on the lookout.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that that's happening. It's just like, keep an eye out for this.
Yeah.
So there's stuff in there
Already from
enough
what
of it that I'm like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
but I would be
I also
curious to know.
Yeah.
Either way, I'm curious to know.
Yeah. I'm not conveying it in any way that is like I know what I'm talking about. So
Well, you used person first language in describing it, children with autism,
Mhm.
which implies to me that that is the language that they used in describing it. Whether that's the podcast themselves or the person who is recommending it to you, even if it's the person that's recommending it to you, that implies they either got that language from the podcast or they're a person who uses that language anyway. And so a person who uses that language is the one that liked the podcast and is recommending it.
okay.
People who use person first language generally tend to not be autistic people themselves, and either are just don't know autistic people, or at least don't know autistic people who communicate with them enough to like express a preference here, or autistic people who've been sufficiently pathologized to think that like that is a better, like we've talked about in the past. If a person prefers person first language, I'm a person with autism, then that's what I use with that person. If a person prefers identity language, I'm an autistic person, then that's the language I use with that person. if I do not know what a person prefers, I default to identity first language. Because the reasoning behind using person first language is that it is in some way bad or insulting or problematic to refer to someone as an autistic person, because their autism doesn't define them. It's not who they are, which is a true statement. Just like being tall doesn't define me, it's not who I am. But we still could say I'm a tall person, and nobody would be like, hey, his tallness doesn't define him. We only say that about stuff that we think is bad. So although it is an attempt to be respectful, to say, no, it's a person with autism, their autism doesn't define. What you're actually saying is they're a person who unfortunately deals with this crap of having autism, or being autistic, or however you phrase it. So that language tends to be preferred by people who are caregivers for autistic people, and then disseminated because people who are caregivers for autistic people have much more of a voice and much more power in our culture than autistic people themselves do for various reasons. So it gets disseminated as like the better language to use. But for the most part, I shouldn't say for the most part, but in many cases, I'll say, I couldn't say like percentage wise, autistic people themselves will say that they prefer autistic over person with autism. That's why I default to that, because to my awareness, autistic people on balance, more than 50% preferred that language than the other. So anyway, that's one of the red flags. The other is not the other. Another is that so the deficit model, which is the thing that neurodiversity is a model that is a response to the deficit model. It's a rejection, explicitly a rejection of the deficit model. And the deficit model, which often gets like conflated with the medical model because they are the same thing in very, very many ways. And most of the time when you're using one of those phrases, you could use the other interchangeably, even though there are some cases in which one applies to the other doesn't. But the deficit model is simply a model that says, what we're trying to do with all these things is say, why would a person be like this? Why would a person do these things, think these things, or feel these things in this way? Primarily, we're concerned about that when what a person is thinking or feeling or doing is problematic, detrimental, either to the experience of others around them and or to the person themselves. And so part of what is important to say here is that oftentimes it's framed as this battle between like caretakers of people with autism who are saying, hey, this is a terrible disease and it's really problematic and we got to do something about it, versus autistic people, self-advocates who are saying like, hey, there's nothing wrong with this. How dare you say that there's anything bad about this? And so it almost gets phrased as like, either you think that there are some difficulties involved with being autistic, or you think it's just great and there's no problem. And that's not the case. As with anything, there's some stuff that is cool, some stuff that's neutral, some stuff that sucks. So it's not a bad thing that we wonder, like, why would a person do this thing when that seems like they don't like it, others don't like it, one or both of those things, right? The deficit model allows for an answer where you say, because that's just the best they can do, right? Like, is that the optimal way for a person to do it? Nope, but it's the closest that person can get to it. They have some deficit, something which makes it so that even though it would be better for that person to do this instead, they're doing this thing, which is further away from optimal, maybe even all the way to like terrible or whatever. And they would love to do this thing instead, they're just not capable of it. Neurodiversity then as a model is saying instead, like, no, everybody does what they're doing for some reason. There's reasons that you're doing that thing in that way. So talking about autistic people having telepathy type powers to me smacks of that deficit model of like,
especially nonverbal.
Right, that what we're saying is there's an assumption not an assumption, it is baked into the diagnostic criteria of autism spectrum disorder. So it is required in order for a person to have an official diagnosis that they have a social deficit. That's like the language in the criteria. So some of what they might be talking about is just like, sometimes these people understand what other people are saying. And they're like, whoa, that's how can that be? Because we've been assuming they lack that capacity, but sometimes they do. And rather than questioning like, well, maybe they don't lack that capacity in the way that we've been thinking, we're going to be like, this is something magic, because it's definitely they're incapable in the way that we thought, but yet they do something we didn't think they could do. So it must be something magic. Again, I don't know that that's the case.
Yeah.
What these people say on the podcast or what the research is saying, but that just suggests to me.
Interesting. Now I'm thinking about me as like a little selective mute kid, and
Have we talked about that on the stream before?
I don't know if we have actually.
That you were officially diagnosed as selective mutism?
I don't think I was officially diagnosed. I don't think we ever went anywhere, but it was.
Well, but even within the school system, you didn't have an IEP or 504 or anything?
No, because it was like, it was preschool to like first grade. So it was,
These days, that would still.
these days, yeah. This was more.
Because there were like official meetings with the school.
Yeah, like the
stuff
teachers
about
would be like, Olivia doesn't talk. Like,
Yeah.
let's not say anything. And mom's like, she's wild at home.
Yeah. Actually, this is a good. I don't know if selective mutism. I think it still exists
still
as
there.
a disorder in the DSM. Okay.
Yeah.
But generally, in terms of like when we're talking about autistic people or people who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, I don't often hear the language of like they're autistic and also have selective mutism or whatever, selectively mute.
Yeah.
I generally hear it as they're intermittently verbal, as like a part of the autism, as instead of a comorbidity, like they also have this other diagnosis.
Somebody was like, they're like, you were selective mute, but you don't have autism. Those two are only connected to each other. Don't, Brendan.
Oh, what?
Oh, it looked like you were like, but you do, Olivia.
I wouldn't say that, especially not on the stream.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that, especially because you phrased it as have autism.
Yeah.
I would not say to somebody.
Yeah.
It's like I might suggest to someone, like, sounds like you're depressed. I would never say to somebody, sounds like you have depression.
Sure.
That's a very different thing.
Yeah.
But yes, those two things are generally linked these days. That's what I'm saying. I'm not even sure if selective mutism. Obviously, you're saying
It
it
is
does.
because I just did it like last year. Did a paper on it.
But part of the reason I'm not sure of that is because I have not heard of anyone with that diagnosis in a while. And obviously, like, that's a specific population. That doesn't mean that it's not a common one. But and I focus on neurodiversity and mostly am talking to people through that lens and with that language. So there's lots of reasons I would hear about.
There's a lot of like getting confused of like, is it social anxiety? Is it anxiety? Like all these.
See, so much of this is like when people are conflating a label with a mechanism. That, like, the example I always use, right, is I am 6'5", and then people will say that I am tall. And I think that is an accurate statement to make. Like, nobody is in good faith or reasonably arguing that the word tall does not apply to me.
Sure.
You could, if you want to be real pedantic, be like, well, compared to what though? Like, compared to giraffes, he's not tall. But the context is generally clear enough that, like, that's a pretty disingenuous way of debating using the terminology. The problem, though, then, is that in this metaphor, someone would then say, like, well, why is Brandon 6'5"? And the answer would be because he's tall, right? The label applies because we have observed a certain set of things. And we are now saying, so that is it is accurate to use this label to describe this person or this experience. And then people say, well, but why are they experiencing that? If we then use the label, well, because of this label we just applied to it. That's absurd. That is literally impossible.
Yeah.
The only way we can apply the label is because the thing is true. Therefore, the label cannot be the mechanism that causes the thing to be true.
Mhm.
So with disorders, with autism, selective mutism, social anxiety, all these things, these are labels we apply based on a set of observations. They are experiencing this set of things. Therefore, we can accurately say they qualify for diagnosis of social anxiety. But then when we say, well, why are they anxious in social situations or whatever, people will say because they have social anxiety. And that's not
Right. It's
an
not the
answer.
same. Yeah.
A mechanism of why a thing happens is a completely separate consideration than what is the label that most accurately applies to the thing we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the reason this gets so confusing is because many of the disorders in the DSM are about mechanisms, and many of them are about, or I should say, are intended to be, are created as though it is about a mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
and many are just about the symptom. In reality, they're all about the symptom because there is no diagnostic process for any DSM disorder other than do they experience the set of symptoms. Like, we didn't discover these things with the disease, we discover them because something's happening and we can look and see something happening. And then, yes, we label it so that we can talk about it and whatever. With disorders, we're labeling it not because we can see the mechanism, but because we can see the symptoms, what we're calling symptoms. We see the things that a person is experiencing or doing, the actions, the thoughts, the feelings. And then we're like, this stuff seems to happen in tandem with this stuff quite a bit. And those two things also seem to happen in tandem. And we start to find patterns. We're like, these things all seem to happen together a lot. It is useful for us to put them together in a cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, some of what we do after that is like, well, what is the mechanism behind why these things happen together a lot? But just because certain things happen together a lot doesn't mean that there is a mechanism behind all of them, right? Like, I'm trying to think of a good example from a different field to make that point of like correlation does not equal causation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that
I gotta ask my mom if I had individualized plans now. I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Like, as an example, it is true that if we survey things, you know, we would find that like there is a correlation between being a C-suite executive at an American company and being a man,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, the trends are like these two things go together to a disproportionate degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would say, well, that's because they're both a result of the same thing. Either being a man makes you better at being an executive, or being an executive makes you more likely to be a man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or both of those things result from some underlying same thing. And in this case, no. Right? Like, there is connective tissue there that because of how men are seen and opportunities that men have and how women are treated and et cetera, it is more likely for a man to be in that position. That's true. But the thing that caused them to be a man is not the same as the thing which caused them to be in that position.
Right.
And being a man didn't make them more effective at the position, even though it did contribute to getting the position. And being in that position does not make one more likely to be a man.
Right.
So things can correlate without being linked by any causal factor. That's not a good example, but whatever.
It
That's what I
worked.
came up with.
It's Listen, I got 0 out of 3 on that section of my exam, so I'm not going to be helpful here.
ADHD is probably a better example to use for this. No, you know what? Let's start with depression. Let's start with major depressive disorder.
Can't wait.
That, like, some of the diagnostic criteria for that is you are sad, you are intensely sad, like significantly sad for a significant portion of the day, for most of the days of the week, for 6 months, for a period of 6 months or longer. That's required for a diagnosis of major depressive disorder. Then there are a bunch of ones that it's like, and also 3 of the following 7 are true, and one is like a major disruption to sleep patterns, right? I don't actually have them all memorized. I'm not trying to like, but there's plenty of reasons that we could say like someone who is significantly sad a significant portion of the time would also be sleeping significantly less or significantly more than they previously had been. You know, there's lots of like, one of those mechanisms could be that all of a sudden, for whatever reason, some environmental thing is waking you up all the time and causing you to not sleep well. And everybody would agree with the statement that like, if my sleep is going to be interrupted every hour and a half and I only get 5 hours of it in a night, then I'm probably going to struggle more emotionally than otherwise, right? We could also suggest sometimes that it might be the other way, and that passes like the face validity test, right? That we say like, no, something happened about which you are very, very sad, intensely, significantly sad, at a very high level of frequency and whatever. If that is the case, there's all kinds of reasons we could think that that would disrupt your ability to sleep well, right? Like, or make you sleep more because you're feeling so many emotions and it's exhausting and you sleep more. Or you're feeling so many emotions about this thing that you're not doing your normal routine of like going to work or whatever other things you would be doing. So combine that with that you're also emotional and exhausted and, you know, off your regular, then yeah, you're going to sleep more. Where like, you know, people sleep more when they take a week off for a vacation anyway, but because you're not significantly sad during that time, we don't think of that as a symptom. So switching to ADHD now, it is entirely possible that the mechanism, or at least one of the mechanisms behind why people experience the symptoms of ADHD, you know, the forgetfulness, the difficulty focusing, all that stuff, right? That one of the things that could cause that is that their sleep is terrible. That again, if anybody was waking up 18 times a night, like if you go from sleeping through the night fairly soundly to you're woken up 18 times in a night, you would also say like, yes, the next day I'm probably going to have a more difficult time focusing and remembering stuff and whatever, especially if that happens over and over and over. But what if you only ever slept that way? If your whole life you woke up 18 times a night, that would just, that thing of like, I'm having a hard time focusing, would just be your reality day to day. And you wouldn't assume that it has anything to do with your sleep because you don't know that your sleep is unusual. People don't generally sit around and talk about like, how often do you wake up in the night? And there are many versions of waking up in the night that you don't even consciously know happened or remember. So, for example, then, in this scenario, if a person were to have sleep apnea for whatever reason that disrupts their sleep their whole life, that could contribute to a difficulty maintaining concentration and forgetting things and the other symptoms of ADHD without them ever even knowing that that's happening to them, because that's how it's always been. And they don't even notice or remember they're waking up, or if they do, they just assume that's how everybody is.
That's me.
And there is a significant correlation of people who are diagnosed with ADHD. I'm not confident in this number, but I believe that it is true. That people who are diagnosed with ADHD are 6 times more likely than the general population to be diagnosed with sleep apnea.
Fascinating.
So it could be that some portion of people who are diagnosed with ADHD have, to some significant extent, are experiencing those symptoms in part because they sleep in very disrupted ways. Whereas other people could like sleep soundly, but for different reasons, they're struggling to focus and remember things and whatever, right?
The problem is, Brandon, I know we're talking about correlation causation, but I'm thinking about, I have a sleep apnea machine. I got it last year. I used it like a couple times, but it's so much work to like clean it out, put it on, not have my mouth open when I'm trying to fall asleep, because otherwise it's just like air coming out. And so I don't use it because that I'm willing to pay the cost of like.
So this is going to sound nitpicky
Okay.
at first, but you don't have a sleep apnea machine. You have a CPAP machine.
I have a CPAP. Yes.
CPAP stands for continuous positive air pressure.
Yes.
meaning it's a machine that is effectively pumping air into your airways
Yes.
so that there is always more air pressure outside of your body where your nose and mouth are than there is inside of your body. Because what an apnea is a, maybe it's not an apnea, but what apnea refers to are moments of like disrupted breathing that wake a person up to some degree. So you have like 17 apneas in a night. Is that the noun version of it?
I don't know.
I don't think it's
I just think it's like
I believe the incident is called an apnea, but I could be wrong. But it is that word. It just might be like an adjective version or something. Like it's definitely not like an apneatic episode or whatever.
Right.
Anyway, that's what sleep apnea is like decreased or diminished or interrupted breathing. And humans have all kinds of things wired into us that will wake us up. And one of those things is if you're not getting enough oxygen, your nervous system is detecting that and wakes you up so that you can address it. Very like sad side note, but that is one of, I think, the more valid, certainly very more common theories about sudden infant death syndrome is that perhaps for developing infants that either generally or in some specific cases, that system which wakes you up when you're not getting enough oxygen isn't developed yet or isn't operating optimally.
Sure.
So that in and of itself doesn't cause a bad outcome. But if for whatever reason you're not getting enough oxygen and the thing that would wake you up to address it doesn't work, that could cause it.
Does that just take a while to develop or just in those cases?
We don't know.
We don't know.
It is just theory, right?
Yeah.
We don't even know what that mechanism is.
Yeah.
It just, we know that it happens, but
Exists,
we don't know what exactly. Again, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, we don't know what it is. So what's happening is for whatever reason, and generally there are two different reasons for sleep apnea. One has to do with a muscle weakness, and one has to do with actual like size of body parts, which is why sleep apnea is more common in people who are bigger or more fat. But there's a part of your, I don't know, throat system. I don't know what term to use. Because you have the windpipe and the food pipe, right? And so there's a little valve that closes off the windpipe whenever you're swallowing for food and whatever. And with apnea, at least there might be other versions of it, but this is what I know of, is that with apnea, what's happening is that thing is closing off the windpipe unintentionally while you're asleep to some degree.
My tongue, why I have a double chin is just because my tongue is so large and that blocks my throat. No matter what I do, doesn't matter how much weight I'll lose. It's just like, it's forever there. Almost like a jaw structure.
That's what I'm saying. It's about like the shape of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that shape does correlate with like if a person gets more fat, that is one of the things that can get more fat. But that's not the only reason that could happen. So there's a muscle that holds that up out of the way that needs to be tense to some degree, even when you're asleep, when you're sleeping in certain positions. That if that muscle doesn't tense, whether that's for a muscle, like something about the muscle or that's something about the nervous system, not sending the proper signals or whatever, that it will fall and close it off. Also, if it gets too large or too heavy, it can fall and close it off, even if the muscle isn't weak. Anyway, so that's the mechanism. And that's why sleep apnea is a disease, because there's a mechanism. We know what it is that is happening that's causing the symptomatic experience. But yeah, levels of consciousness is like a whole field in philosophy, basically. Like this is a thing that we all know exists, that consciousness isn't just like you're either conscious or not conscious. There's degrees of it. And so we can't know for sure that almost anyone, at least at some point, could say something like, I must have been sleeping. I didn't think I fell asleep, but like 45 minutes passed and I didn't think it was that long. So I must have fallen asleep in there at some point, right? Like that there's experiences where you're asleep even though you think you've been awake the whole time. and vice versa, that there are, people talk in their sleep, or you sit up and, respond to people, and then they're like, oh man, that thing, and you're like, I don't remember that at all. So there are times where you think you've been asleep and you were awake in some way to some degree.
Because it feels like that happens when I'm talking to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, honestly, so much of this has to do with like consciousness and how weird it is, but how much we want to pretend like it's very simple and easy to understand.
I was watching a video about thermal energy and thinking about how there's just a little bit of dirt and then it's all rock. And then I was thinking about all the creatures in there that like don't have consciousness, but like are in there. And that was spooking me. Oh no, you're moving your head side to side. Like maybe they do, maybe they don't.
Well, depending on what you mean by consciousness.
Yeah. That's why jellyfish freak me out.
Why?
Because they don't have brains.
Oh.
And oh no, do they?
No, I don't know. I assume not.
Yeah.
No. I assume you're correct.
Yeah,
my reaction was more to the idea that consciousness and brain are either the same thing, or that a brain must be required for consciousness.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I did put that together. But no.
Like for anybody who believes, for example, in like life after death or before birth, or some version of life or awareness or whatever that isn't connected to a physical human body, that person doesn't believe that a brain is required for consciousness. That's what that means, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things we don't know. We don't know what consciousness is. We know what the experience is that we then like label it as consciousness, and then we have lots of theories that make sense or help make certain things make sense, but there's still plenty of stuff that doesn't make sense, and we haven't come up with anything that makes it make sense.
Yeah.
Personally, and this is the general thought among people who think about this, I believe that that it is literally impossible for us to ever understand consciousness. This is called the hard problem of consciousness. My thinking behind that, again, not unique to me, but not the same as what everyone means by the hard problem of consciousness, is that nothing can model itself completely. Because if we had a computer that was attempting to create a model of itself, then if it was fully accurate, the model of the computer that it creates would have to be capable of all of the things that it itself is capable of. Otherwise, it would be some reduced version of a model, some abstracted version of it. Which means that the initial machine, in order to create a full, accurate model, would have to be able to create something that can do everything it itself can do. And then on top of that, also be able to be aware of that as a separate model, which is impossible. You can't, if it could do that, the thing itself would have to do that, right? Like, you can't do everything you are capable of doing plus a little bit more, by definition. So any model we construct has to be reduced from what the actual thing itself is, I believe.
Yeah.
Other people have pushed back on this and have their own thoughts and theories and stuff. But yeah, it's like mostly doesn't matter kind of a thing. Like I don't know how many bones are in my feet. I know there's a lot, but I don't know exactly how many, because it's not been relevant in my life, right? Even if I've broken a toe or whatever.
Have you?
I think so.
Really?
It's those things of like, if you hit your pinky toe bad enough.
You never got it checked out?
What would they do for a broken pinky toe?
I don't know.
There's no cast. It's just like, it's, whatever. You broke it.
I guess so.
Again, that's the point. It's like, it's not two things. One possibility is it is not sufficiently problematic to be worth looking into resolving it. But the other element is, how valuable is it to do the thing that you would think of as like looking into it, right? And that involves some prediction of what would be able to happen as a result of it, and to what extent would whatever that result be actually change anything for me. So if we're like, oh, there's nothing to be done about it, you don't look into it. Or if you're like, well, they could do something about it, but what they would do about it isn't really going to change much, then it's not worth looking into it. But that's what consciousness is. It's just thinking about this stuff for most people doesn't matter. It's not relevant in your life, at least not in any way that you've identified it as being relevant. In the same way that like having intellectual awareness of the bones in my feet has never been, I use my feet all the time, and if there's a problem, it matters. But I have never, it's even possible that knowing the bones in my feet would have helped me at some point, but I've never identified it as that. It's never been identified to me as this would be useful. In part because there are people that I just assume and trust will handle that if and when it becomes an issue. If there's some issue with my foot, I don't need to know, I just know who to go to that has the knowledge and the information to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with consciousness. Even if it would be useful to you to know more about it, all you really need to know is like who you would go to help you with it if and when it becomes an issue. So yeah.
And that's us?
Yeah.
People coming to us?
Well, theoretically, therapists are one of the options that people would think of. Depends on the specific thing that we're talking about, right? Like a person might think of a therapist, might think of a spiritual leader, might think of a doctor, might think of a mentor or a friend or all kinds of things that you might think of. But consciousness is super weird.
The us was in, why I said us was like, I have to help people with their but I mean.
That's what we do.
Yeah, I guess I've been doing that.
And honestly, the vast majority of therapists don't know anything about consciousness or think very much about consciousness either, because that's not required in order to, like, in the same way that a person could theoretically know, like, okay, this is happening in your body, take this medicine and it will help you, without knowing the mechanics underlying why that meant. For the people who develop the medicine, they would have to understand the mechanics to some degree. And that is what most therapists are doing, is they're utilizing interventions that have been developed by others, and they just learn like how to identify when is this intervention, what is the condition, what are the criteria that would indicate that this would be a useful intervention, and then utilize it, prescribe it, teach it, do it, whatever. And that's not to speak down on that. Like I'm saying that the majority of the time, that's plenty of knowledge and information and to do stuff. It's just that in the cases where it's not, then like if theoretically a doctor, and I don't actually know this, but I'm assuming that this is true, that most doctors don't really know like the mechanisms of why each particular medication does what it does. Not that they would be capable of knowing it if they thought about it or looked into it, but like, and I could be wrong. Maybe it just seems like a lot to memorize.
I'm like coming from a dad who's an internist, so like that's his specialty. I'm like, yeah, they do, but like.
And maybe they do. Maybe they know like the mechanisms of it all.
I think it depends.
But even if they do have access to that, like even if they know it, maybe they can retrieve it from memory. For the most part, they wouldn't. Right? Like for the most part, it would be, oh, I need to get information about what you're experiencing to be able to know what tests, like come up with an idea of what's happening. And then based on that idea, I would run these tests to confirm that that's what's happening. And if not, then we do the next step. But if that does confirm that that's what's happening, then I give you this treatment. It would be a waste to think in every occasion, like, why does this intervention do what it does? It's just do this thing, and then we'll check and see how things go. Only when I like give you that intervention and it's not working the way we would want it to, and you come back and tell me, then I would go into like, okay, let's move to the step of what's the next most complex thing, right?
Did you hear me?
I did.
Is that right?
I don't know. I don't know what you meant by that.
It's like grist for the mill. Okay, this didn't work, but that's okay because now we have new information and that.
Oh, in therapy, yes. Yeah. In medicine, I guess it would apply. I don't think it's something that a doctor would say.
Oh my God, no. Oh my God, no. That's not what I was implying.
Because for us, the process of what we do requires all these interactions, whatever. And medicine doesn't require that. I mean, there's no practical way to do it otherwise, but it could theoretically be done in the abstract if you just had access to the information you could then make a prescription without having to actually interact with.
Isn't it like trial and error though? You know, like
Oh, that's not what grist for the mill means.
no, I know that's not what grist for the mill means,
Oh,
but
yeah, it's trial and error. It's all trial and error.
okay,
I'm missing something.
it's okay.
I need to get some more water. We'll be right back.
Okay, I'll be here. Getting challenged to speak on my own. We joke around because Brandon says grist for the mill a lot. Because every piece of information is helpful and teaches us something. Yeah, so that's where I brought it up. My head is hurting, and I'm going to be practicing for a session 0 of a podcast soon. And I'm kind of like amping myself up for having to speak on that in around an hour. I have no idea what I'll be speaking about. And it's going to be another challenge for me to kind of throw myself in as best as I can. Maybe it'll be different because it won't be with Brandon, or maybe it'll be the same. I'm not quite too sure. So, I'll be back.
So, I forgot my water bottle today, so I have to fill up my tea mug with water.
We have taller cups.
I'm sure we do. But I don't even, I know where they are enough that I could go find them, but
Doesn't matter.
that's the point, right? We only pay attention to information that we have reason to believe is worth paying attention to.
Yeah.
So I know they're in the cabinet somewhere and I could go grab one. And I thought about that too, but then I was like, I don't know when those have been washed and I don't want to wash. And I have one that I use anyway, so might as well just do that.
Great.
Anyway, were you talking while I was gone?
Yeah, I was.
About what?
I was talking about how I'm gonna be doing a practice podcast in an hour, and how I'm thinking about that right now and wondering how it's going to be different or the same with or without you. Like how speaking with you, sometimes I let you take the reins. And I was just saying, I'm curious to see if I will take more reins during this podcast.
What do you mean by take the reins?
Perhaps I mean like dominate or lead and steer. Like
So what is the thing you're referring to as leading or steering? Or
the
dominating?
conversation.
No, that's the thing that's being led or
Uh-huh.
whatever. But what is it that you're saying I am doing that is the leading or the steering or the dominating?
The stream.
So what is it that I'm doing in this experience that you're
Oh,
thinking of as being me dominating or leading or steering?
you're just speaking. I don't know.
Yeah, so this is one of those things, right, where understandably people conflate it. Like the person who's talking more is one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I definitely am talking more than you are talking. No argument about that. And there's an assumption then baked in that the person who's talking more is the person who's making the conversation go where it goes,
Mhm.
or that they are making it go where they want it to go. But it's at least theoretically possible that those two things are different, right? That the person who's steering the conversation could be someone who's not saying as much.
Sure.
So just worth
That's-
separating those things out.
Very true. Yep. I'm thinking about even this moment, like any motion I make or word I say, you're taking into account and utilizing.
I mean, theoretically, right?
I
Like,
think, I don't know.
there's to some extent I'm aware of things that you're doing. To some extent, there's things that I'm not aware of, but still theoretically processes are taking in that information and frameworks are being applied, and then
Mhm.
some intuitive or impulsive response comes out,
I don't know what to say, Brandon.
Well, it's just interesting to know that that's how everybody would think about it.
Yeah.
Generally in our culture, right, is that the person who's talking more is the one who is in charge.
Yeah.
Even though we all have had experiences, in fact, fairly common experiences, where the person with the more authority or power is actually speaking less. But it's an understandable correlation, and it's not necessarily untrue. I'm not even saying that I am not leading or steering or dominating the conversation.
Yeah, it's just
Certainly not my intention.
no.
That doesn't mean that it's not happening.
Yeah.
I am at all times and work with clients, but also just in all conversations always. Yeah, let me see if I can frame this in a way that will. I do like to talk. You know, people say that's the thing about like, oh, that person just likes the sound of their own voice. I don't literally like the sound of my own voice. I don't dislike it either. I'm just saying that the thing that's enjoyable about speaking is not hearing me myself speak, but I do like talking. But in the metaphorical sense, it's very sad to me the idea that some people don't like hearing themselves talk. You know, like
I love when I actually do like the sound of my voice. More so hearing it back versus hearing it up. Because
it's mellifluous now that you draw attention to it. Yeah,
mellifluous?
mellifluous.
What does that mean?
Musical.
Yes, that's I say
soothing.
There's a melodic, I don't know, variations in there, which I find enjoyable. Don't know what else I was gonna say, but I do like this literal sound of my voice, but I don't like not knowing what I'm saying. And
yeah, well, I think what most people experience in our culture generally, but especially when they're talking about it this way, of like the idea that whoever's speaking more is the one that's in charge of the conversation. I think a lot of what's happening is that people, when they're speaking, are more aware of their own experience than another person's. Not in all contexts, but in certain contexts, like a meeting or like a presentation or whatever. They're very aware of like what they are thinking and what they're perceiving and what they're worried about, and including what would often be talked about is like, no, I'm very focused on what they're thinking, what the other person is thinking and feeling, but you're focused on your thoughts about what that is. So again, that's one of the reasons it's understandable that people would assume that like a person who's talking more is in charge, because they would assume that it goes with this confidence thing, right? That if I were to be talking that much, I would only be doing that if I was very confident in all the things that I am saying. And if I was that confident in all the things that I was saying, I would be very aware of all the things that I'm saying and be very deliberate and conscious in what I'm saying and tracking it all and whatever. So there's an assumption then that that's what I'm experiencing. But I'm not. I don't know what I'm saying. I know that I bring up points all the time that I don't finish and whatever. I don't have a lot of awareness of all the things I'm saying. Otherwise, how, you know, everyone thinks like, well, you can only talk that much if you really know so much stuff and you're really confident in it all. But you know, when you think that, like, but who could ever do that? And then it just gets thought as like, wow, Brandon knows all that, is that confident? No, I don't do that either. I think that would be impossible. I just let myself say whatever I say. I hear it as it comes out. That's the only way I know to talk this much.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're doing, then yes, you just have to trust and assume. I have to trust and assume that whatever's coming out is being prompted by what I'm picking up, combined with what it's like, what's being retrieved from long-term memory and whatever.
Oh my gosh. I just had so many thoughts. I'm like, you're going to say them, and then they're gone. Oh my God.
You were going to say them, or I'm going to say them?
I was going to say them, and I just forgot them when I was about to. Okay, so say it.
Well, that's a great example of what happens, right? You have thoughts. As soon as you become aware of the fact that you have thoughts, your awareness is now about like observing the thoughts rather than the thoughts themselves.
Yes.
And the point of observing your thoughts is to be able to make some determination about what to do with those thoughts, which is great sometimes and other times terrible, depending on what you're trying to do.
I often find like I'm in a 7-year romantic relationship, and like people bring up conversations we had, and I just have no memory of them.
Yeah.
Absolutely zero.
So you think you have a bad memory?
About things that I've said, yes. About things people have told me, no.
This comes up a lot.
Does it?
With a lot of people. This idea of good or bad memory. Kind of like perfect pitch or whatever. Like that's just a thing you have. You just.
Yeah.
In our culture, it's almost exactly synonymous with being intelligent or dumb, right? Like having a good memory. Almost anyone would argue that like intelligent people have better memories and dumb people have worse memories. So it's just different language for the same basic concept. There's some intrinsic thing that just makes you better at doing stuff with information. And just like with intelligence, what that means then is people, when they do something that they think indicates that they're intelligent, that feels good. Like, ooh, maybe I'm smart. And it lasts not very long, that feeling. Whereas when they do something that they think might indicate that they're dumb, it's like, oh no, and that feeling lasts. Same thing with memory. Whenever you're like, oh, I remembered that, that's cool. Most of the time you don't even think, oh, cool that I remembered it. You just don't even recognize or think of it as having remembered something. You just
I don't know, not
used
about
it.
me. I'm usually like, isn't it cool that I remember that?
Most of the time.
Ooh, sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
But most of the time,
I don't know.
like for example, every time you use a word, you remembered that word.
Right.
Do you notice like, hey, good for remembering
That's
the word the? Yeah, no.
Right.
Most of the time you don't notice it. Sometimes you notice it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, ooh, good, cool that I remembered that. But that doesn't tend to last very long. And when it happens, it tends to be like, yeah, but that's just like trivia. It's cool, but it doesn't really matter or whatever. Because if it mattered, those are the instances where you don't notice that you remembered it. It just came up. But anytime you don't remember something that you're like, it would have been beneficial to remember that feeling of like, oh no, that lasts.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, I've met many people. I am one who would say about themselves, like, I have a good memory for, and then some specific thing. I have never met anybody that says, I have a good memory. I'm good at remembering stuff. And every person I've ever met would say, I have a bad memory. Or at the very least say, I have a bad memory for. Not everyone says I have a good memory for something, but everyone says I have a bad memory for something, at least. Or I just have a bad memory.
Mm-hmm. What's your good memory for? Or strong memory, I suppose, if we're not using good.
The way I used to describe it most of my life was for things that are presented as like discrete bits of information.
Uh-huh.
But what it really is the same as everybody's. It's just language. Right?
Why is that the same as everybody's?
Because language is the gateway for memory. Like, try to remember something, but don't use symbolic representation.
Right.
Yeah. I've said before, it's like a zip file. Like the whole point of memory, of all the things that our sensory organs detect, that we sense, we only perceive a very small fraction of that. Of all the things that we perceive, we only maintain in, you could call it working memory or short-term memory or consciousness or whatever, but like short-term storage, a very, very small fraction of that. And of all the stuff that we are aware of for even a moment, like that we have in short-term storage for even a moment, of all of that, we only put into long-term memory a very small fraction of that. And of all of that stuff, we only encode it in a way that allows us to recall it rather than recall versus two different types of retrieval. Recognition. We only code it in ways that we can recall rather than just recognize a very, very small fraction of that. So each step of the way is a lot less. And we know it's beneficial, valuable to remember things, to recall things.
Versus recognize.
Recall is the kind of memory that you can pull up whenever you want. Recognition is the kind of memory that can be pulled up when the proper stimulus is applied. The vast majority of stuff is that, right? Like recall, the start of the alphabet song.
Right.
But anything other than the very first note, that's all recognition. The second one comes up in response to the first one. And that's mostly what we do, because it's all about resource expenditure. It would theoretically be valuable to be able to recall all of these things. Mm-hmm. So why don't we? Because it costs something, and so we have to be judicious. We attempt to be judicious. And so that means creating sequences is the most effective way, because recognition is less cost intensive than recall. So we just need to be able to recall the initial start of a sequence, and then the rest of the sequence just needs to be encoded as recognition. Mm-hmm. Unless there's some reason that we would need to jump into that sequence not at the beginning, we do it that way. That's why anybody, it's like, what's the fourth letter of the alphabet? It's like, let me think for a second.
Yeah. I always thought I was just an idiot, that I had to go,
no,
or do math.
If anybody had encoded numbers 1 through 26 of the alphabet directly to
The
the
numbers.
number, that would be such a strange way for them to have utilized their resources. Like, why would it be relevant? Something would have happened for it to be relevant to them
Right.
to do that. And either just as a cool party trick, or I don't know, could happen. But
I mean, I guess every person I've talked to, they're like, yeah, what comes after F? Or like, we do slow down a second.
and sometimes you develop like certain ones that you can kind of jump straight to
Right.
if you utilize it enough, or if it happened in a particularly notable way at some
Right.
point or whatever. But anyway, the point of all this is that each step we leave out data.
Mm-hmm.
That like our sensory organs are picking up much more data than our perception of the thing contains. And our awareness, even in a short-term memory from like something we perceived a moment ago, contains much less information.
And that stresses me out.
Only because you thought it was different, not because it's different than it ever was.
I know.
It just stresses you out to find out you're wrong about it. As it does for most people.
Yeah, it's just.
Wait, there's all kinds of information out there I'm not aware of? Yeah. That was always true. You just didn't think about it that way.
Yeah, and now I am, and now I do.
Yeah, but I'm saying this because it makes it less scary.
Does
Because the
it?
point is, you've never had access to that information, and it's been fine.
Yeah.
So just because now you're aware of the fact that you were unaware of all that stuff doesn't make it a problem that it wasn't before.
Yeah. Just.
In fact, it's nice to have that reaction because then you can see like, interesting that I'm like responding as though if I don't have conscious awareness of something, it's a big problem. But in reality, I have not had conscious awareness of this stuff all along, and it wasn't a problem.
So weird. Yeah. Yeah.
Weird, but good.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to be aware of everything all the time. And we can always say, but what if something you're unaware of causes a problem or even kills you? You know,
Yep.
that happens. But I mean, at least as far as the killing part, you're still alive. So there's that. And to whatever extent stuff that you were unaware of causes a problem or makes it so you make a mistake, like, well, yeah, we make mistakes. So whatever mistakes it has been, whatever problems it's been, have not been
Mhm.
anything different than what it's been.
What a relief.
I know it is scary because people, especially in our culture and especially, this is not universally, all people would like to be aware of everything, theoretically, right? Like a person might not answer that question that way, but our systems are designed in such a way that it's clear that having access to information is at least theoretically beneficial. So it would be at least theoretically beneficial to have access to even more information. The limiting factor on that is the cost, that like theoretically beneficial is fine, but if it costs you $1 to get this theoretically beneficial thing, then you're going to start to say like, well, how much is really like likely to be beneficial, and you balance it out, right?
I'm thinking about magicians and the art of distraction and like taking our awareness to somewhere else.
They don't call it distraction. Call it misdirection.
Misdirection. You're so right. You're so right. I even watched Penn and Teller's masterclass, and I
Because distraction is a usable term. It's a useful word. But the thing that we're referring to is not a thing that exists.
right.
It just means that we're centering the thing that we're not paying attention to as though we should be,
Right.
which there's all kinds of times that you could say, yes, we should be paying attention to
You'd
this.
be a great magician.
Instead over here. I am not a sleight of hand magician, but I've mentioned I do believe that language is magic. And
Yeah.
that yes, what we're doing in many ways. See, misdirection is different from distraction.
It is.
Because what it's saying is, I am directing your attention. I'm doing something that calls your attention away in a way that is different from where you would theoretically want to pay attention to see what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I am directing you, but in a deliberately ineffective way, in a way that deliberately is going to make it so that you can't notice, that you don't notice the thing that you would like to notice. I am doing it, directing it.
Yeah.
Just differently than you would want me to. Except really, obviously, you do want me to because you like the magic of it, you know. Yeah, we call people's attention. And honestly, I do think, I know right now I was starting to say something, I don't remember what it was, and I could go back and try and put it back together. But for the most part, like, I stopped it because you said something else,
right,
or reacted in some way, and I followed where you went.
Right.
when a person just intuitively says whatever, that's the time that you can most be confident that whatever they're saying is an attempt to address what the other person is wanting in the conversation. Because how could it be something that I'm wanting if I don't have a conscious thought of what it is I want? It can be frustrating after the fact, for sure, or embarrassing or whatever. Like, oh man, I know I said like 1,700 different things that I started half a sentence and never finished, and people might be frustrated with that. But I'm responding to you, not to like anybody who would be frustrated with that. If they were to say, wait, hold up, finish that, then I'd go right back to it. But they're not saying that, and you're calling my attention, so I'm going wherever. So it's only with streams and stuff that I start to get nervous about. Like, I know I'm going where that person was interested in going. I don't know that I went where the listeners or the viewers would want to go.
This is why we all gotta practice interrupting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want the things that you want.
Yeah. I was thinking about, it's connected to what you just said. Don't remember what you just said, but
see, when trying to figure it out, that's when you lose it.
I know.
If you just said it.
At the wedding this weekend, I started saying something to somebody, but then like somebody else came in and started talking about something. And I'm sure that happened many a times at the wedding, but for some reason that one sticks out of like, man, I still never got to finish that sentence. And I remember what that sentence was. And
my guess would be that there was somebody else that you thought would have wanted to know the end of it, or you were thinking now would have wanted to hear the end of that sentence.
No, it was just, I think I was like finally like in like a zone of like communicating, and then someone just came in and I was like, oh man.
But if you remember the end of it, because the other thing is you're speaking intuitively, authentically, like we're talking, right? Then you are hearing what you're saying as you say it.
Yeah.
I had no like pre-knowledge of the words that are coming out of my mouth. I hear them, I guess, slightly before you, because I'm closer to the source of the sound, you know. But which makes it like, interesting to listen. Doesn't mean I think everything I'm saying is great and valuable, but it's like listening to somebody else, and that like, what's that? Oh, interesting. Like I think about it as I hear it, the same way anybody does. So there are times where it's like, oh, I wanted to finish that, even though I don't think anybody else would care, because I would have wanted to hear how the rest of it went.
Yeah, that's 100% it. Yeah.
But if you remember how it went, or what you were going to say, that shouldn't theoretically apply, unless you think there would be point to like verbalizing it, or you were trying to like make an impression or give somebody an understanding or something, in which case you're back to like, I have some reason to think that it would have impacted somebody if I finished it.
Now I'm looking at it like, this is not important at all, the thing that I'm remembering.
You know, kind of the point about a lot of what we're talking about is that in order to do anything any differently than it's been done before, including, you know, some new and different ways to do it, things are less effective or ineffective, but some are much more effective or beneficial in some other way. In order to do something in any new and different way, you have to have paid attention to stuff prior to that moment that nobody else thought was relevant, including you.
Yeah.
In order to make a new connection, you have to have paid attention to something that nobody, including you, had connected to anything meaningful before. You've got to chase a butterfly around in order to be able to paint that butterfly later. So trying to evaluate in the moment, it's worth doing, right? Trying to evaluate in the moment of like, is this worth paying attention to or not? It's worth doing, but you can't actually know.
Yeah.
So it's fine to think about it, but here's what I can say. Of all the versions of me that have ever or will ever exist, I currently have more information than any of them in the past. And I currently have less information than any of them in the future. So that doesn't mean it's not worth thinking about what I might want to do in the future or whatever. But it is helpful to know that like, this is the least informed version of me that will ever exist again. So if I come to different conclusions in the future, like, cool, because I'll know more. So I right now might think this is irrelevant, but I also know that in the future version of me might be like, no, that is relevant. I figured it out or whatever.
It's like, I don't know if you know the TV show Severance. Doesn't matter if you do.
More of the premise.
Okay, great. Premise isn't important. A lot of people are complaining about season 2 being like, I just miss when like we were getting like the arcs of the characters and things, but now we're just like finding out like information about them. And it's like, no, that is the arc. Like we don't know the arc is happening because we're just getting information. But like if there's a season 3, like that was happening then. We just have season 1 to back up that we saw an arc happen.
That shows a lot of faith in the show creators because that is theoretically true.
Sure.
But we've all seen certain shows where it's like they're just planning on figuring it out later.
Right.
And then they didn't really. Or maybe they did, but they didn't communicate it in a way that
Yeah, I can also
seems
make that
cohesive.
argument for this of like really easy to write a mystery, really hard to solve a mystery.
Yeah, forever everyone was not forever. After Lost became hugely popular,
Mhm.
everyone was using the phrase mystery box, talking about this kind of show forever, where because of the success of Lost, everyone was very fixated on the mystery box, that you're just showing people like, look at this box, there's a mystery in there. And people are like, what is in there? And when it's well executed, or at least satisfyingly executed, either you already knew what was in there, or at whatever point you figured it out, if you figured it out and expressed it in a way that was very cohesive so that the viewers felt like you always knew, like everything led up to this moment. And if whether you already knew or didn't know, because I think the Lost showrunners would say that they knew all along, they certainly didn't communicate it in a way that most viewers were like, oh, this makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels unsatisfying. So when you're doing a mystery box thing, there's like the building the mystery, and then there's the payoff. And when you do the payoff, it's over. So you're incentivized to like keep building the mystery. And then the longer you do that, the more payoff you got to get in a very short window. Because you're only doing that once you know you're done. You're like, okay, well, we've built a mystery for 7 seasons. Now we have 1 season to pay it all off.
That's so much.
You can do it well, but it is tricky. That's why that type of show doesn't tend to exist as much anymore as it did after that like mid 2000s to mid 2010s. Everything was all about like, what was that one of like everybody in the world blacked out for 8 minutes at the same time and nobody knows what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm trying to think of a bunch. I mean,
There's
Battlestar Galactica had some of that going on. Heroes.
a whole flight of
Something like
people
that.
on an airplane in a TV show, and then they get off, and it's like 10 years later, and
Oh
everyone.
yeah. That a lot of that stuff where it's like something weird happened.
Right.
Interesting. And whatever it is we pick as writers to be like, it allows us to tell a lot of interesting stories regardless of what happened, right? Like that's part of what made Lost work so well was regardless of the mystery of the island, just the premise of a bunch of people ended up on this island lets us tell a bunch of interesting backstories. Like this episode about this person's backstory, if this show had nothing to do with a mysterious island and a plane crash, would still be just an interesting story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So it lets you have that hook of the mystery while still just doing like cool stories. So lots of stuff that it's like we can take as long as we want before paying off this mystery, because in the meantime it just enables us to tell cool stories. But then the American viewing public is way too over-focused on plot. And so things like Game of Thrones or Lost or whatever, where it's like, I really enjoyed watching this for a lot of time, which is the point of any art, but I didn't like how the plot resolved, and therefore the whole thing sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So like, that was really enjoyable, and the plot did not resolve in a satisfying way.
Right.
We gotta wrap up. It's good to be with you.
Like I see that you're leaning forward.
I know I gotta move on to some other things.
Yeah.
Good to be with you all. We'll be back, maybe. I'm going to be out of town next week, but we might do it remotely. We may, or maybe you'll do it without me. I don't like how Baldur's Gate 3 ends, and now I don't really want to play the game again. I got 6 hours into it and then never touched it again, and it's been so long that like I really want to play it, but I'm like, I don't remember, and I have to start over and do the first part again. And, I get that way all the time. Thanks for being here. Maybe you'll do it without me or with somebody else.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll be here. We'll be here next week.
Yeah.
If
In
not,
some way,
we'll-
shape, or form.
We will.
Thanks.